Baltimore, important preseason football game. We still have a little teeny bit of Oriole baseball left here in front of the friends and family crowds here against the Oakland Athletics and the big green and gold elephant. Of course, the Orioles headed to Fenway Park this weekend and afternoon game. Luke, what do you want to say about Ubaldo Jimenez that has not already been said? I'm just hoping they don't sign him to like a two-way deal next year as a spring training invitee.
As I uttered at some point, maybe in about the third inning of Tuesday night's game, thankfully there are only so many more of these. Soak it in, however you want to put it.
And every time we see the last one, or what we think is the last one, we think it might be the final one. But it's never the final one, right? It just isn't.
I mean, it's just, it's insane. I mean, we had this conversation how many points last year?
Dude, I have tapes of all of this. I mean, the amount of words. We have, I mean, I bet we're 100,000 words a win for that guy over the course of 4 years. Literally, right? I mean, literally.
It might be. It might be. You know
how many wins does he have as an Oriole? Like, seriously. Like, I don't even know, but I'm going to look it up. I said he wouldn't get to 48. I don't know that he's going to get to 24, right? In 4 years.
It reminds me of that guy who spent a bunch of money on a first date with a girl that he liked. And
right.
I thought that there
Flowers,
was really
right?
potential
Chocolate.
there.
Got
really
a limo, did it all, bottle of wine, did it all that night.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, went all out and really liked her. And it was just clear it wasn't happening. And maybe she would humor him from time to time just to be polite more than anything else.
You dated this girl, didn't you? You know this girl. I know her, too.
And what would that do? That would give him hope. And he'd keep trying and keep pining and keep pining and keep pining and not give up and not try to move on. And it's not going to happen. No matter how much you want it to, it's not going to happen. And that's what you have with Ubaldo Jimenez. I mean, he's coming off of a stretch here recently where he had 3 or 4 decent outings. But now, the last 2 outings have kind of bordered on that not being competitive whatsoever. And really, I mean, that's been the story of his entire 4 years, right? I mean, 2015, the first half was really good. It's about the only extended stretch of time.
Well, you could say that about a small sample in Cleveland and in Colorado as well, right?
Right. Well, I mean, Colorado, he was legitimately good.
In the beginning.
I mean, at the very beginning of his career. I mean, this guy was a legitimate all-star pitcher at one point. But the thing is, as time has gone on, those periods of prosperity have become shorter and shorter, and the periods of not just being bad, but, I mean,
not giving the team a chance to win, period, right? Just that's it.
In 21 starts this year, I looked at his 21 starts this year, and 11 of those, he's given up 5 or more runs. So even starts where he's given up 4 runs, even starts where he's given up 3 runs over 4 1/3 innings and walked batters and was taken out early. I didn't even count those because I said, okay, even if he was bad in those starts, gives up 3 or 4 runs, most nights that still gives you a reasonable chance that you still have a plausible, probability of winning. 11 of his 21 starts this year, he's given up 5 or more runs, where I would just say that's not even competitive. Over half of his starts.
But, dude, if you would have told me at any point in 14 or 15 or 16 that in 17 he was still going to make 21 starts, I mean, this has been par for him. I mean, he's horrible. I mean, he is not a solution at all, and it really has never been. And, part of this with the old man is when he gives a guy $12 million, he's going to, that horse is going to race. And that's, that was the story with Albert Bell as I went back and wrote the Peter Principles. Like, when it came time to throw Albert out of here with the hip, he threw Albert Bell out there to prove that he couldn't play to get rid of him because he was going to play him if he was going to pay him, period. I mean, and I don't... He hasn't eaten any money here in 25 years. I mean, name me a contract where they've really eaten a lot of money. They weren't going to eat $20 million worth of Ubaldo Jimenez 2 years ago. They were going to hide him on some fake injury he had, and it's absurd. It really is. So
well, but at this point, we're getting down to the point where it's not that much more money they'd be eating. I mean, they ate Bud Norris's contract halfway through 2015. And remember, he was making $9 million that year, so that was probably around $4 million. I can't remember off the top of my head the exact number, but they've had a couple of those where they've eaten $3 or $4 million. They ate money on Jay Gibbons.
They didn't want to eat any money on Miguel Gonzalez. I mean, they didn't even risk the money on him.
Right. I mean, this is just insanity at this point. I mean, it's been insanity for a while, but at this point, it's just absurd.
Do you remember last year when he pitched and lost Game 7, which was game? You remember that part? I mean, like, it's unbelievable. I mean, we use the term GOAT now as greatest of all time, the GOAT with periods and uppercase and all that. I remember my dad, a GOAT was like this guy. This is what a GOAT is. A GOAT was Donnie Moore. A GOAT was Bill Buckner. This guy is, we talked about Glenn Davis last week. Dude, this guy's stolen a lot more money than Glenn Davis ever stole around here and been far worse, quite frankly, and didn't have a trapezius that disappeared, midway through his term. It's, he's going to go out and make 5 more starts, right? Literally.
I mean, at this point, you have to think that.
Even when they go 40-man.
and that's where we get to the other side of this that is even more disconcerting as far as for the future, that this team hasn't identified anyone that they think can be better than Ubaldo Jimenez or Chris Tillman. Take Gausman and Miley out of the equation for a moment, and they haven't been good this year overall either. I mean, they have ERAs, 5 or more. That's bad. But at least an ERA of 5, you're going to get a reasonable number of competitive starts mixed in there, right? I mean, it's not going to be pretty. It's not good. It's still below average, but it's at least tolerable from a standpoint of Wade Miley has had some decent stretches this year. The optics have looked bad all year, but he, for whatever reason, and a lot of it's probably just plain luck, that he's still given them a reasonable chance to win in a fair number of his starts. You can't say that about Jimenez. I mean, it's just, at this point, it's as though you're in a casino playing some kind of table game that has terrible odds, has really bad returns on it, and you're just,
I know what it is. It's you're playing Powerball like it's blackjack.
Yeah, I mean, or you're
like you're going to win a hand soon.
You're playing some kind of scratch off where you're spending absurd amounts of money, and okay, you might win a $5. You might get a $5 winner every once in a while. You might even get a $25 winner every once in a while. When Jimenez on that, once or twice a year, where he might give you 8 innings.
By the way, he's won 31 games. He's been the winning pitcher for the Orioles 31 times in 4 years. I would have lost that bet. I just would have. I mean, he won 12 games 2 years ago, incredibly, and he wasn't completely horrible in 15.
2015 was the one season, and even that year, he was really good in the first half of the season and was not very good in the second half of the season. I mean, that's... But
I remember we all fretted them giving him the ball to begin with in 15, and then he blew up the 16 season in the end, and now the 17 season, he's just one part of a huge cog of problems with their pitching,
Well,
but they weren't counting on him this year. They were just giving him the ball, literally, right?
Well, but it's, and that's the thing. If he had a 5 ERA, that wouldn't be good. But, I mean, again, you would, even with a 5 ERA, you're getting some reasonable number of starts where you have a pretty decent chance to win. I mean, Kevin Gausman was really bad in the first half of the season. Second half of the season, he's been much better, and they've had a good chance to win most of those games. This is just so far below the bar of what should be acceptable. It's just insane that either one, they refuse to take him out of the rotation, just cut their losses and DFA the guy, or two, they sincerely don't think they have anyone in the minor leagues right now who can give them a better performance than what he's given. I mean, as much as there was hand-wringing about guys like Tyler Wilson and Mike Wright, their ERAs weren't this bad when they were in the rotation.
Well, you could say the same thing about Tillman now, dude. I mean, don't be looking at Tillman's stats either.
Well, at least Chris Tillman has been a representative real pitcher for them. And look, it's absurd that Chris Tillman's back in the rotation too. Don't get me wrong. But at least there, I could understand them trying to have some patience there. Even though he looked like the same guy on Sunday when making his first start in a few weeks.
Well, you can also understand with Jimenez when he goes out and throws 2-hit shutouts, which he's capable of doing some of the time. He has the stuff and all of that, but then he'll go out and it'll be 5-0 in the second inning, and that's not going to work. There's been a whole lot more of that. I mean, over the body of his work, I'm almost like I look at it and I'm like, Well, I mean, they did give him the ball a lot, and he did win 31 games, and he did make, some starts, and, and you start to make excuses over the course of the contract, and you just look back and you remember how he pitched. He's the worst pitcher in Oriole history for me.
I mean, as far as lack of return that they've gotten for their investment, I mean, this is a guy that with the Orioles, I don't care about the win total. I look at the ERA, I look at the the whip, I look at the strikeouts, I look at the home, all those, because he's pitched, he's been pitching on good teams this year, or these last 4 years for the most part. I mean, that's, he won 12 games 2 years ago. As I said, was really good in the first half of that season, wasn't so good in the second half of that season. I mean, last year having 8 wins, that was a large part because he pitched on a good team. But, I mean, you just look at this guy, you look at his wins above replacement, from a sabermetric standpoint, and over that time, over 4 seasons, he's been worth 1.2 wins above replacement. And even on the free agent market, where they kind of talk about every one win above replacement is worth $7 or $8 million on the open market. So really, he's given them about $7 or $8 million worth of production over the last 4 years combined. So you know what? If they had signed him to a 4-year, $8 million contract, then that deal would have looked okay then. But when you've given up $50 million and you're getting barely above replacement production over 4 years, I mean, it's completely absurd. And yeah, you're right about Chris Tillman. They stuck with Chris Tillman way too long, and the fact that they might give Chris Tillman more starts here over the final 5 weeks is absurd too.
Well, it's not like they have a crush on these guys. I mean, honestly, they don't have any other answer, which is the real serious indictment of Dan Duquette and this organization. Anybody that's going to tell me Dan Duquette has done a good job here, based on wins and losses, I guess so, but whenever he leaves here, and I'm assuming it's going to be another 14 months, the cupboard's relatively bare here. And this year was the ultimate indictment in a year when they loaded up with Trumbo, traded to get Seth Smith. They have Machado and Scope and Adam Jones in the prime of their careers, and they didn't really have a season this year because they didn't have any pitching. I mean, they're running guys out there with ERAs of 6.5 and 8 in late August in the, quote, pennant race and having them pitch. It's disgraceful.
It's
disgraceful.
Well, and going back to the point you just made, how do we know that they don't have anyone else that could help them? I mean, look at what Parker Bridwell's doing in Anaheim right now, and this guy barely even got a cup of coffee. I'm not so sure at this point that it's even about being completely devoid of talent, and I'm not saying they have a lot of pitching talent at AAA and AA right now, but it really makes you wonder as far as their failure to develop that talent. Because, and I'm not telling you Parker Bridwell is going to be a 14-game winner year after year moving forward. I mean, this might be a flash in the pan, but you know what? A flash in the pan or two would really be helping this rotation right now, wouldn't it? I mean, it's just
like Tim Beckham.
It's amazing to me. And it's just incredible that they just continue to beat their heads against the brick wall with Jimenez and with Tillman.
Where's Vance Worley right now when you need him? Or right? I mean, that's
right.
Or Alec Asher. I mean, give Alec Asher the ball 26 times this year. I don't think the ERA would have been 8. I mean,
it wouldn't be good, but as I said, we were complaining so much about Tyler Wilson and Mike Wright in the last couple seasons. They never had ERAs this bad, and it just speaks to how horrendous it's been, and yet they just continue to keep doing it. I mean, it's completely absurd at this point. Look, I understand the financial part of it. We've talked about that since his first season, frankly, when he was sent, mysteriously sent to the disabled list in the second half of the season. But there's not that much money you'd be eating at this point. So, I mean, I just don't understand. Is it just plain stubbornness? Is it some delusion that he's going to get on a roll? I mean,
is it some inside joke that Buck sends him out there to make the old man happy? I mean, it's a weird organization. Anything's possible here, man.
But like I said, at this point, we're not even talking about that much money you'd be eating. They've eaten some contracts where a guy was owed $3 or $4 more million, and that's kind of the territory we're in at this point. It's not much, and the idea that you might as well disband what you have at Norfolk if you don't think any of those pitchers can give you better than a 6.5 ERA. We're not asking for 3.5 or 4 here. We're talking about
why have a AAA team at this point?
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I mean, right. That's how absurd this has gotten. And you can keep talking about, well, he is capable of pitching. Well, those stretches have become so fleeting at this point. It used to be. We mentioned 2015, first half of the season, he was really good. Go back and look at his numbers. He was really good for the entire first half, and then wasn't very good in the second half. Okay, fine. Then you go to last year, and, wild card game aside, and he shouldn't have been in that situation, first of all. I put that way more on Buck Showalter than Ubaldo Jimenez pitching in that situation. It was out of his element. He's not a reliever. Fine. I'm putting that aside. The last 5 weeks of the season, he did pitch really well. But one of the reasons why you weren't in a better position with 5 weeks to go was because he was so horrendous for the first 4.5 months of the season. So, you keep talking about, he might get on a roll. Well, look how much damage you're inflicting on yourself by waiting for that. I mean, like I said, it goes back to being in a really bad table game in a casino or playing a really lousy scratch-off ticket that, okay, you can keep playing it and you can keep wasting more money, and yeah, you'll get a little return here and there. But overall, you're still taking a major loss there, and that's where the Orioles are with Jimenez at this point. It was great that he had a 3 or 4 start stretch where he was solid, but was bad in Seattle and was horrible on Tuesday night. And
this losing to the A's, this is really sticking in your craw, right? I mean, playing 500 ball against them over the last 2 weeks, this has got to be a hallmark. This has to be a get well for any team that's serious about making the playoffs. I mean, this thing's really, really fizzled here over the last week, hasn't it?
Since this team went 8-10 at the end of that last, the homestand before the West Coast trip, they won 8 of 10 to get back to the 500 mark when they won that first game of the trip in Anaheim. Since then, they've gone 5-9. They've gone 5-9 against 3 teams that have a combined record of being 12 games under 500. And I get it that Oakland accounts for most of that, but Anaheim was below 500 when they started playing them here over the last 3. The Angels can attribute their surge here to playing the Orioles, quite frankly, because they won 2 series against them. Seattle has been a team that's hovered right around 500 all year, give or take a game or 2 above or below. And Oakland, who has been terrible, and right there with the White Sox as the worst team in the American League all season. And the Orioles, they split a 4-game series in Oakland, and they need to win the rubber game on Wednesday afternoon to just win a series there. I mean, they're 500 against Oakland this year. I mean, that's not good enough. At the time of the year when your chances are starting to really circle the drain, and mathematically you're still there, but you're not there really.
Mathematically right now, they've literally fallen below everyone. Other than Toronto. I mean,
right.
they're below Tampa. Minnesota won again. Kansas City's winning again. Angels are still playing 520 ball. Seattle's over 500. And Texas is a game under 500 right now. So literally all of those teams in the West by the end of the day could be over 500. The Orioles, they're headed to Boston. They're not going to kiss 500 anytime soon.
It sure doesn't look like it. And anytime they get on the verge of kissing 500, as you called it, was that's when they get the cheek turn, right? I mean, they get the.
Well, then when you get to 500, somebody else is 6 or 7 games above, because that's the way it works when there are 8 of them.
Yeah, I mean, typically, and Minnesota looks like they're that team. The Angels are looking like that team now. I mean, they've both won 7 of 10, and Minnesota's 65-60. Angels are 65-61. It's like I said, mathematically speaking, there's still a chance there, but you're down to the final 36 games left here, and you're 4 games under 500. So you do the math to get to the point where, say, you have 86 wins, which that might do it. 86 wins might do it. 86 and 76 might get you the second wild card. But even to do that at this point, that's a heck of a record.
That's 14 games over 500 for a team that has played 125 games at 4 under. So, I mean, and it's not trending in the right way in any way. They're not hitting particularly well. They're not pitching particularly well. Certainly, you and I have gone through running the bases and, basic strategic things and running out ground balls. I mean, I can't believe, Jim Palmer's having a debate now about, whether guys should run the ball out or not. It really is kind of absurd. And I know Buck Showalter now is getting questioned about being a hard driver, right?
Well, going back, the offense is they've been the most productive offense in the American League since the All-Star break. I mean, they've scored more runs than any team in the American League since the break. Now,
I'm talking about it on a night when they're losing 5-0 in the seventh inning. They have not been consistent. They've been streaky as far as hitting.
But
that's who they are.
No team's going to score 7 runs every night. You and I talked about this 2 months ago when they were going through that historic stretch of terrible pitching, 20 in a row where they gave up 5 or more.
Yeah, and they've needed Beckham and Machado to be otherworldly the last month, to be representative. Those guys have been really hot. Nobody else really has been.
Sure. I mean, I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, they've scored more runs than anyone else in the AL since the All-Star break. That tells you that they've scored enough runs in totality if they were going to get any semblance of decent starting pitching. And they got that for about 2 weeks at the end of July into early August. They got a stretch where it was solid. It wasn't special. It wasn't dominant. It wasn't second half of 2014 good, but it was okay. And you saw what happened. They reeled off a nice stretch where they got themselves back to the 500 mark. But since then, they've reverted, and you have guys not getting through even 5 innings, certainly not getting through 6, certainly not getting into the 7th inning. The kind of the range that is just the reality today. I mean, no team has pitchers that are consistently going 7 innings, getting into the 8th inning. But when you don't even get through 6, when you're struggling to get through 5 quite often, I mean, it's just and then even to take it a step further, take a look at what happened on Tuesday night. They get a nice little comeback. Scope gives them the 2-run single in the bottom of the 8th on a great at bat where he fell behind 0-2, looked terrible, looked like it was going to be one of those strikes out on 3 pitches, lays off a tough slider, and then he lines a 2-run single to get to within 1 run. It was a 5-4 game, and then Darren O'Day gives up a long ball in the 9th inning. I mean, it just and it really speaks to what you were talking about with some of the issues with base running and at times the defense being leaky and the bullpen, which has been really, really
Dude, it hasn't been a good team. They're an under 500 team, and they've played we've watched them every night. I mean, that's who they are at this point, right? It's who they were at the All-Star break, quite frankly.
I mean, that's the thing. Their relative strengths, I mean, it's all about the starting pitching. I mean, really, when we start talking about other stuff too much, we're deflecting from the narrative of the starting pitching being absolutely horrendous. I mean, as bad as it's been in the history of the franchise,
or any franchise for that matter.
1 or 2 teams over the course of all their years in Baltimore, but their relative strengths, talking the offense specifically in the first half, and the bullpen, which has still had its stretches where it's been really good, and it's still a strength overall. But those strengths haven't been as good as they've been in the past to try to compensate for their biggest weakness, which is the rotation. So it's just Tuesday night, a very frustrating night at the Yard, and it begins and ends with Ubaldo Jimenez putting them in a 3-0 hole right off the bat in the first inning.
Anything you want to say on regard to the Ravens here and getting Joe Flacco back on the field or not at this point?
Well, just kind of a strange week because they had 2 days off in a row, which I don't think was a bad thing when you consider where this team has been from a health standpoint, and considering they had a 9-game stretch from their second preseason game until they play on Saturday night against Buffalo. So I like that they did that. It was nice that they did the team building thing, going to Arlington National Cemetery and the Pentagon. That's cool. I don't know if it makes them a better team in the long run, but it's certainly something that
John thinks so
from a camaraderie standpoint. But certainly anxious to see who's going to be back on the field here over the next couple of days of practice leading into Saturday night, because we know Joe Flacco is not going to play. Harbaugh indicated after the Miami game that he wasn't going to be practicing this week. Now, we're getting to a point where if he doesn't get on the field soon, you really, really are wondering about how rusty he's going to be and just wondering how productive that offense is going to be at all going into the start of the season. But it's not just Flacco. They need to get Ronnie Stanley back on the field. I've talked a lot about this offensive line. I'd really like to see them sustain some success on the ground. And I understand that it might not be as easy when you have Ryan Mallett in there and they're clearly not taking a lot of chances with him, but you need to get this running game going, because if Flacco, you roll out the ball week 1 in Cincinnati and Flacco has no live game reps under his belt like he's going to, and you're averaging 3.1 yards per carry, then that's a major concern. I want to see this running game get it going a little bit, and a big part of that is Ronnie Stanley, and not knowing if he's going to be available. You would assume everyone else, including Yanda, will be out there on Saturday night against Buffalo, but not knowing what's going to happen with Stanley, at least this week, you got to see that. I'm assuming we're not going to see Rashad Perriman, because John Harbaugh last week when he talked about it didn't sound optimistic that he was going to be back, that his return was imminent, even if he is back for the start of the season. But that offensive line, that running game, they've got to get that figured out. And as much as you're in a holding pattern because you're a quarterback, the quarterback that shouldn't matter that much in terms of what is happening on the offensive line. And I want to see that group be better. I know some guys haven't been in there, so you're trying to grade it with the curve as much as you can when you see who they trotted out there against Miami. But
it's going to be interesting to see how much Zuda plays versus Ryan Jensen, and what they're thinking about that position, and whether Zuda is center and Jensen is guard, or I don't know. There's a lot of bodies there. I think it's very hard to be predictive. When I've been out and about, and my mom's funeral over the weekend, people want to talk a little football with me, and I don't have any predictions on any of this on the offensive line. And how can I predict whether Joe Flacco's back's going to hold up? I do know it's the end of August and he's not out there, and that concerns me as to whether he's going to be out there on September 10th and what we're going to see from him once he gets out there. And, hey, I talked to all these guys in Buffalo this week. I've done some unbelievable radio this week. We've had Steve Tasker on and Aaron Schatz from Football Outsiders, JT the Brick, Vic Carucci, all these people. And we're talking about the team. Every one of them was like, well, the whole story of the team's Flacco, because without him, you're not doing anything anyway. So we could sit here and talk about the offensive line and the wide receivers. We're just rearranging chairs on the deck of a sinking ship if Flacco is going to play 6 bad games this year because his back's not going to hold up.
Understood. But we've also seen, and we've seen this really since Super Bowl 47, that he can't go out and do it by himself either.
Sure.
And he needs to be better. He did not have a very good season last year.
No doubt about it.
You eliminate all the other variables. I don't think he had a very good season last year. But that said, if you have your offensive line in complete tatters and you're not running the ball worth a darn, and he hasn't had a chance to build rapport with Jeremy Maclin. And here's another factor that we haven't really talked about, and we haven't had a chance to talk to Joe since the end of July, but our assumption, and maybe behind closed doors he is doing this, and maybe he has been doing all kinds of work on the side over the last 2 weeks, let's say. But quarterbacks, you wonder about his arm as far as, is he just going to be stepping in there and just throwing like he's in mid-season form? Is there a progression there? Like, it's the same thing with a pitcher in baseball. You don't show up on April 3rd and just throwing 100 pitch. There's a process to that. So, and I'm not saying that it's an extensive process for a quarterback, but at the same time, that you don't want him just going out there just firing the football as hard as he can day one when he hasn't been throwing as far as we know over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And quarterbacks start throwing before training camp starts. They kind of get a progression there. So that's something to just keep in the back of your mind. I'm not saying that will be a problem, but I think that's something relevant. I'd like to know, has Joe been throwing a football at all over these last, let's say, 2 weeks, even though he hasn't been on the practice field per se? So there's a lot to be concerned about on the offensive side of the ball. The good news is there's a lot to like on the defensive side of the ball. There's still some questions about Correa being consistent enough at inside linebacker. I still want to see all these guys that have looked good up front. They have to carry it over to when it really matters, and you want to see them stack another good performance against the Bills on Saturday. But that defense looks like it has a chance to be really, really good. And based on what we're seeing from this offense and knowing just the reality of where that group is right now, that defense better be really, really good, or not going to like their chances here very early in the 2017 season.
He is Luke Jones. He is available 24 hours a day at Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. Of course, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. Ravens back on the backfields of Owings Mills in preparation for the Bills. The Orioles doing a getaway against the A's, taking Thursday off and headed to Boston. We've got you covered. The morning newspaper delivers to your email inbox each and every morning. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. And then, of course, if there's any breaking news at all, including Joe Flacco getting back on the field, we'll get it to you first on the WNST text service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Don't forget, if you are headed to London next month, we're throwing a big party on the Saturday before the game in East London, in the Docklands area. We are doing the Emirates cable car as a group at 3 p.m. on Saturday afternoon. We're throwing an all-day party at the Fox at XL, about 2 blocks away. We'd love to see your face in the place. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.